Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be going over my top 5 boss fight books. Books. Or books from boss fight books. I don't know. I'll figure that one out later. This company, I feel, has contributed the most to video game books, and I've read probably about 20 of them so far, so here are the top 5 that I think are the best. Galaga by Michael Kimball. This one just has a whole lot of charm in it. The formatting is a little odd at first because he kind of breaks these things up into different levels of Galaga. But once you kind of push past that, there's a really great story in here about how Michael used video games kind of as an escape from what was going on in his life. There's just so much in this. It can be a funny book if you don't approach this as being like a direct history for Galaga. But it is a very good book, and yeah, there were a lot of times that I just kind of chuckled at stuff. This was one of the earlier books from Boss Fight Books, and I think people didn't quite understand what was going on with it at the time. If you look at a lot of the reviews, you'll see some things that don't quite make sense, as a lot of people thought it was going to be a history of the game. And that's not really what you get. And this is one of those kind of personal stories that just happens to include video games with it. It really is an enjoyable book. It's very short compared to the other ones, but it's definitely worth a read if you give it a chance. I really enjoyed it, and I think you guys will really enjoy it as well if you pick it up. This was a book that oh man, I really think I related to this one more than any of the other books, especially when Salvatore talks about, just retro game collecting, what was going on in his life at the time, how he sort of went back to retro games, and it just really felt like it mirrored a version of the life that I followed. It was so cool because I was reading along with this and I kept thinking, yeah, I remember doing that. I remember, going and trying to buy retro games as cheaply as I could, and I remember collecting stuff back in like the late 90s, early 2000s when NES, SNES, and Mega Drive games were all, or sorry, Sega Genesis games, were all just dirt cheap. Like you could walk in with $20 and walk out with like a good 10 NES games, depending on the ones that you bought. But this book does revolve around the Mega Man series, particularly Mega Man 3. And the part that I found the most interesting was Salvatore talking about his life and everything like that. There are bits from Mega Man 3 in here. It's sort of the way that he kind of anchors the story. He talks about the different levels going through each one and then gives you a little bit of history about his life and other stuff that was going on at the time, and kind of how he retreated into retro games and how he sort of wishes that the retro game prices had gone down, and kind of how the collecting community and the popularity of retro games kind of exploded with the internet and that sort of thing. It really is a spectacular book. It's not my favorite on this list, but definitely read this one. It is just a wonderful story, and it was one that really resonated with me. Every once in a while, I will come across a book from Boss Fight Books where I did not play the game. And when I was reading this one, because I decided to take a chance, I had a lot of time on my hands in 2022 and 2021, so I picked this one up and decided to sort of take a chance on it. And while I was reading Nick's kind of recounting of what's going on in the game, how the game was made, how the company making it really took a chance to sort of break from the norm from what other video games were doing at the time, it made me want to go out and purchase this game and play Shadow of the Colossus. It was just really cool. This is one of the many games that I missed out on back when it came out. But reading through Nick's kind of story of the game and the game's development, it reminded me a bit of Katamari Damacy, and there are a lot of parallels between the two games, specifically how they broke away from the direction that the industry was going at the time. And yeah, just reading about it, I kept thinking about how, it's a very how you can get just immersed into a game and kind of get lost in the game's world. Especially with Shadow of the Colossus, where not a lot of the plot and the history and the lore of the game is really given to you. At least not in like a story. You're allowed to sort of look at the different ruins and everything and come up with your own ideas of how things happened. So you can go to like a place that's a ruined city where there's just a giant colossus there that you have to defeat. And you can just wonder, like, what were the people like here? What was this city? Like, how did it tie into the other places in this giant land that you're in? And how did this land really impact, and how did it fit into the much larger world of Shadow of the Colossus? Because you just don't know much about what was going on in the world outside of like the Forbidden Zone, and you don't really even know why the Forbidden Zone was forbidden at the time. It's just a great game, and I think Nick really does a spectacular job of describing the game and talking about why he loves it. It really is just a fascinating book and just really well written. I really enjoyed this book. I don't know about you, but I didn't know that I wanted a book about NBA Jam until it came out. Because it's one of those games that I didn't experience in the arcades, but I played a lot of it on the Sega Genesis. There's just something about the game that, makes it just so great and everything like that. Uh, it is basketball, it is a sports game, but that doesn't really explain why this version is so good. Because you don't need to know really any of the rules for basketball. You just need to know that, hey, I need to score. That's it. You don't have to worry about the penalties or anything like that for the most part. But it is just a really great game, and this is a really good book. Ryan goes over the history of just the game and of Midway. And there was so much to learn about Midway and just the development of the game and everything. And, I didn't know anything about the spin-offs or the spiritual successors or anything like that. I don't know. I think this... Let me look over my notes here. I think Midway made some dumb moves. Like, instead of making a direct sequel, they didn't. They kind of called it something else and everything, and they didn't stick with just calling it NBA Jam, and Ryan talks about how they tried to like innovate a little bit with the series and whatnot. But yeah, it's just such a great book. There's a lot of stuff in here. He does talk about some of the other sports games in the genre, like the NFL Blitz and the NHL Hits games. And then there are just a ton of stories from the people who made it that are just absolutely wonderful. This book is so good. If you're a fan of either Midway, arcade games, or NBA Jam, then definitely check this one out. It is a wonderful retelling of just the history of a great game and a really fun company. If you're a fan of Resident Evil, then this is a great book and you should definitely pick it up. It gives you the history of the game and the survival horror genre, but the part that really makes it great are just Philip's memories about both, about just playing different survival horror games, growing up in the 90s, and hanging out with his friends playing video games. It's really just a spectacular book. It's a wonderful story, and yeah, I really love this book. There are moments in this where Philip uses the game to talk about his own experience, like the horror game history, the psychology of horror, and kind of the way that horror movies and horror games frighten you. There are other things that he brings up as well, and I love it when he gets into like the horror movies and that sort of thing. It, like I said, it really took me back to being a kid in the 90s and just trying to find horror movies that I hadn't been allowed to really watch before. And thinking back to going down to our general store, because yes, my small town had a general store in it, and renting a bunch of R-rated horror movies at like the age of 12 or something ridiculous like that, where I would bring home like all of the Friday the 13th movies and watch those. And then later on, my friends and I would rent games like Resident Evil 2, and we'd try to beat them all in one night. And it was just so much fun. And reading this book, yeah, it brought all those memories back. It's just a really, really fantastic book. This one is the best of the Boss Fight books, or the books from Boss Fight books. This one is really a must read for the series. If you only wanted to pick out one, then definitely read Resident Evil by Philip J. Reed. These 5 books I think are all really great, and I love each one for like different reasons. These are the 5 that I've enjoyed the most out of the 20 or so that I've read so far. I think they're into another season at the time of my recording this, so there's going to be a few more. I think they might be up to like 29 or 30 at this point. But in my opinion, these are the best 5, and the 5 that if you don't want to collect all of them, if you don't want to read all of them, then definitely pick these ones up, because each one is just really great. One thing to keep in mind with boss fight books is you're not just getting a history of the game. More often than not, you're getting the author's personal history or personal story with the game and some of their own history. So don't go into it thinking you're going to learn a whole bunch of new stuff about a game. Think about just kind of sharing an experience with someone else who really enjoys that game as well. You might not agree with them on everything, but it's still a really great game to read, or really great book to go through and read. That's going to wrap things up. Starting to forget how to speak English again. That's going to wrap everything up. I'll talk to you all later. Let me know what your favorite boss fight book is in the description below, or in the comments below, and I'll see you later. Bye.